The angel of death in Exodus wasn't an angel. We all think we know the story of Passover, right? God sends 10 plagues to free the Israelites, and the last, most horrifying plague is the death of every Egyptian firstborn. For centuries, we've been told this was the work of the angel of death. But what if I told you the original Hebrew text of Exodus never actually mentions an angel? The Bible uses a different, more mysterious term, Hamashchit, or the destroyer. Figuring out who or what this destroyer really was changes everything we thought we knew about Passover and reveals a surprising truth about the God of the Old Testament. So, who was the destroyer in Exodus? Elasfrun. Section 1. The story we all know. To really get what's missing, we have to remember the story as it's usually told. For generations, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, suffering under the brutal hand of Pharaoh. Their cries reached God, who called Moses to be his instrument of liberation. With his brother Aaron, Moses stood before Pharaoh and delivered God's simple command, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh's heart was hard. He said no. So God unleashed 10 plagues, each more devastating than the last. The Nile turned to blood. Frogs, gnats, and flies swarmed the land. Livestock died, and painful boils broke out on the Egyptians. Fiery hail rained down, and locusts ate whatever was left. Then a thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days. Still, after 9 displays of divine power, Pharaoh wouldn't budge. His stubborn pride set the stage for the 10th and final plague, a night of unimaginable terror for the Egyptians, but a night of salvation for the Israelites. God gave the Israelites specific instructions. Every family had to take a perfect 1-year-old lamb, sacrifice it, and paint its blood on their doorposts. They were to roast and eat the lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, fully dressed and ready to leave at a moment's notice. God announced that on that night, he would pass through Egypt. In every house, not marked by the lamb's blood, the firstborn son would die. From Pharaoh's own son on the throne to the son of the lowest servant, and even the firstborn of the cattle. This single, devastating act would finally break Pharaoh's will. This night became known as Passover, because God would pass over the homes of the faithful. And the agent of this terrifying plague? In our modern imagination, it's always the angel of death, some hooded, shadowy figure doing God's dirty work. Uri, Section 2. The problem in the text. This is the story we've all heard, but this is where it starts to get interesting. That popular image of a distinct angel of death is just an interpretation, a layer of tradition that's been added over the centuries. To find the truth, we have to peel that layer back and look at the words the Bible actually uses. The key verse is Exodus 12:23. In most English Bibles, it reads something like this: "For the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to strike you." Notice that term, the destroyer. The original Hebrew is Hamashchit, Hamashchite. Now here's the thing. The Hebrew word for an angel or messenger is malach, malak. That word appears hundreds of times in the Old Testament, but it's nowhere to be found in the Exodus 12 account of this plague. The phrase we'd expect, malach hamavet, which literally means angel of death, is also completely missing from the story. The author of Exodus made a very specific choice. they didn't use the normal word for angel. They used this more ambiguous, more unsettling term, Hamashchit, the destroyer. This isn't just a different word choice, it's a totally different concept. The term isn't a proper name, but a description of a function. It comes from the verb shahat, which means to destroy or to ruin. So why? Why that specific word? If God was sending an angel, why not just say so? This linguistic puzzle forces us to ask a huge question. If the agent of the 10th plague wasn't an angel, then who or what was the destroyer? Section 3. Hunting for clues. To solve this biblical mystery, we have to look for clues, and the first one is hidden in plain sight. In the fascinating and seemingly contradictory way, the text describes who is responsible. Throughout Exodus 11 and 12, the focus shifts back and forth. In some verses, God takes direct ownership of the plague. In Exodus 12:12, he says, Israel will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and Esai will strike down all the firstborn. It's personal. God himself is the one acting. But then, just a few verses later, we get Exodus 12:23, which says the Lord will not allow Hamashchit, the destroyer, to come into your houses. This suggests a separate agent that God holds back. So which is it? Is God the one striking the Egyptians, or is it this destroyer? This ambiguity isn't a mistake. It's a powerful theological statement. The text presents God as the ultimate judge, and at the same time uses the destroyer as the instrument of that judgment. For our second clue, let's look at how later Jewish tradition wrestled with this. The Passover Haggadah, the text read at the Passover Seder, gives a definitive interpretation. It explicitly states, I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, I, and not an angel. I will smite all the firstborn, I, and not a seraph. And I will carry out judgments against all the gods of Egypt, I, and not a messenger. I am the Lord, I, and no other. This tradition, central to Passover for centuries, completely rejects the idea of an intermediary. The rabbis who compiled the Haggadah saw the ambiguity and resolved it by emphasizing God's singular, direct power. Our third clue comes from other parts of the Bible where a similar, destroying figure shows up. In 2 Samuel 24, King David angers God, and God sends a plague. The text says, an angel of the Lord was the agent of destruction. David actually sees this angel over Jerusalem with a drawn sword, and God speaks directly to the angel, telling him to stop. This story is incredibly revealing because it shows that biblical authors knew how to talk about a destroying angel when they wanted to. But even here, the being is called an angel of the Lord, not the angel of death. The figure in Exodus is even more mysterious, lacking even the title of Malach, or angel, which suggests an even closer identity with God's own action. Section 4. The Big Reveal. Who was the destroyer? Okay, we've seen the clues, so who or what was Ha-Mashchit? The answer isn't a name, but an idea, and it's way more profound. The destroyer wasn't a character in the story. It was a description of God's own power in action. There are two main ways to think about this. First, Ha-Mashchit can be seen as a direct manifestation of God's judgment. It's a literary device, a personification of one of God's attributes. When God acts to destroy, that action is called the destroyer. This fits perfectly with the Haggadah's insistence, I and not an angel. In this view, there's no second being. There is only God, who both saves and judges. A second closely related interpretation is that the destroyer is a force unleashed by God, but one so completely under his control that it has no will of its own. It's less an angel and more a tool, like a sword in a king's hand. This maintains the slight distinction we see in the text, where God does not allow the destroyer to enter certain homes, but it avoids making the destroyer into some freelance agent of death. The ambiguity is intentional. It ensures our focus stays on God as the one in complete control of life and death. The popular image of the angel of death, sometimes given names like Azrael or Samael, comes from later non-biblical traditions and other religions. These traditions tried to fill in the blanks and create a neat angelic hierarchy. But in doing so, they watered down the challenging theology of the original Exodus story. The Bible's narrative is laser-focused on the direct confrontation between the God of Israel and the power of Egypt, and throwing a powerful, independent angel into the mix would dilute that central conflict. The destroyer wasn't an angel who happened to work for God. It was the raw, active power of divine judgment itself, a force inseparable from the one who wielded it. Section 5. Why this changes everything. Okay, so we've swapped Angel of Death for the Destroyer. Is this just a matter of semantics? Not at all. This changes how we understand the Passover story and the character of God in three huge ways. First, it forces us to confront the tough reality of divine judgment head-on. It's much easier to imagine an angel of death as a grim middleman who handles the messy business of destruction. That lets us keep God at a safe distance, preserving a simple image of a God who is only ever kind. But the Hebrew text doesn't give us that out. By using the destroyer and having God say, "I will strike," the story puts full responsibility on God. It challenges us to wrestle with a God who is both a loving redeemer and a terrifying judge, forcing a more mature and complex view of the divine. Second, it deepens the meaning of Passover. The Hebrew root of the word Pasach, or Passover, primarily means to pass over. However, some scholars and ancient translators argue it also carries a sense of to protect or to hover over. When we see God as the direct agent of judgment, the act of passing over Israelite homes becomes intensely personal. It's not an angel just following a checklist. It's God himself, in the very act of executing judgment, personally seeing the sign of faith, the blood, and actively shielding those who trusted him. God is simultaneously the destroyer of the oppressor and the protector of the oppressed. This dual role makes his salvation even more powerful. Finally, getting this distinction right makes us better readers of the Bible. It shows how centuries of tradition and pop culture can bury the original meaning of a text. The angel of death is a powerful cultural image, but it's not biblically accurate for the Exodus story. By digging into the original Hebrew, we find a story that's more theologically challenging, but also more powerful. It reminds us that sometimes the most familiar stories hold the deepest secrets. This is just one example of how digging into the original text can totally change how we see a story. If you found this as fascinating as I do, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next video exploring another biblical mystery. I'm curious, does this change how you see the Passover story? Let me know in the comments below. For centuries, the story of the 10th plague has been dominated by the image of the angel of death. But the biblical text tells a different, more profound story. It speaks not of an angel, but of Ha-Mashchit, the destroyer. This wasn't a separate being, but a direct manifestation of God's own will and power. This realization shifts the narrative. It's no longer a story about a fearsome messenger, but a story about the complex nature of God himself. A God who judges and saves, who wields the power of destruction while personally shielding his people. It's a powerful reminder that beneath the surface of the stories we think we know, deeper truths are waiting to be discovered.